something that came up recently with hiring. I was talking to a roofer, and they're having trouble managing the phones and just really need kind of an admin person. And they're really struggling to find people. I think they had like 90 people apply on Indeed and two people show up to interviews, and
Yeah.
nobody really was qualified. And that's a common story in a lot of entry level roles. And we've talked about this a little bit with John Matzner on the show, but just hiring offshore talent. I know that you run Near, you're a co-founder of that, and that's access to talent in Latin America. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So
Yep.
LATAM, in particular,
Yeah.
is where we specialize.
Yeah. And so I think, especially in construction, I see the value of Latin America because so many of the employees that you're managing are Latin American. And so I see a real opportunity there to hire people that are overseas in admin roles to help you manage not only customer correspondence, but also team correspondence. Um, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with Latin America, what the real value in talent is down there, and opportunities that lie ahead for companies?
Yeah. Well, I think we started Near, and to be clear, I don't run anything. I'm on the board,
Okay.
and I help get it started. A lot of times people ask me like, "Oh, you're in 12 companies. Like, how do you run them all?" I was like, "Okay, here's the secret. I don't run any of them. And if I am, it's a huge mistake." I sit on boards and I support the right CEOs and leaders as they grow personally and the business. So Near, I have two partners that we incubated and started that business with together. One of whom is Argentinian, the other one is American. They are CEO and COO. I'm board chairman, and then we have a team of 25 or so at this point of people working there. So, we started it because what we started seeing during COVID was it used to be only large businesses would hire globally, right? It was only Price Waterhouse, ExxonMobil, like all these big corporations. I don't. Most people don't know that like most of the financial audits and bookkeeping that all BDO and all these big corporations do, or even ExxonMobil, like so much of America's financial data gets shipped to these offices in the Philippines or Indonesia or Argentina. And what that's done is over the past decades created these workforces that are totally up to speed on American bookkeeping styles, American work styles, all this kind of stuff. So it's not just that there are people who are just call centers or Indian programmers anymore. Like there are tons of people who are up to speed on how that works. And so what I saw and what we saw as we incubated the business during COVID was more and more people who are on the small business side starting to see this same opportunity, right? That with the internet, with all the technologies we have now, your hiring pool doesn't have to be just your local town or just North America. It can be global in terms of the workforce that's available to you. And I've started to build companies exactly the same way. The last two companies that we launched last year all have at least half international workforces. There's Americans and then there's people overseas. So I'm seeing more and more of my friends, colleagues, people in my CEO peer group, they're all like realizing to be competitive now, you have to hire not just from the pool that's right outside your front door, but globally. And so LATAM is actually wonderful. So number one, it's relatively close time zone. And then if you go deal with a lot of the cultures like in Argentina or Venezuela or people in Mexico, they are really much more similar to what we experience here in the United States. Like I live in San Antonio, which is 60, 70% Hispanic. It feels like the northernmost city in Mexico a lot of times. So the Mexican culture is so close to what we're doing. And I think that presents a great opportunity. I'm seeing just a lot of small businesses now where it just used to only be big businesses, but now small businesses are really getting comfortable hiring globally. And it's not just like base level roles, it's senior level stuff, salespeople,
Yeah.
heads of marketing, finance, data analysis. And it's great. I mean, it's helping my friends who own businesses and then their existing employees succeed and scale themselves. So really good stuff.
Yeah. I think we have people overseas, my executive assistants in Ecuador, and it's been a real pleasure to work with. And I think the biggest challenge or myths I think that people face in construction companies is thinking that they're not going to be able to manage them well, that they're not going to be able to handle the remote aspect. And it is a challenge at times. There are definitely hurdles that you've got to jump over. But if you can create systems, I've found that the incentives for those employees are massive. compared to especially an entry level role, where over here you're making, now it's so much more expensive. We're getting up to like $16, $17 an hour for an entry level role. Whereas if you pay that same amount to someone overseas, they can be very experienced and they're thrilled to be paid that same amount, and going to work much harder for that role than probably someone who doesn't have the experience and is just scraping by in a lot of these markets where that's not going to cut it. So that's my experience. You mentioned hiring.
Go
ahead.
Before CEOs, one other thing that I know is a problem for the construction companies I work with, small, is they don't know what they're going to give to these people.
Yeah.
How to start handing it off. That might be a little much for this conversation, but once you start handing it off and you start realizing, wow, I've got my time back, then you more and more and more.
Yeah.
If you've got anything to say about that.
Absolutely. So I think there's two things. One is like remote work, just like us recording a podcast remotely, like that's a different set of skills we've had to learn. And most managers have gone into remote work or overseas employees not realizing they have to do things differently and be intentional about things that they used to get for free when they were in the office, right? For example, well, if you hired a brand new employee, a lot of the socialization and culture that we talked about before used to just happen because they would see people around the water cooler or talk, or go to lunch together. But when you're fully remote, you have to be intentional to create those things. And so a lot of managers today, and I was one of these, like when I first started to do remote work, my first few remote employees did not work out. And the reason was not their problem. The reason was I sucked as somebody managing a remote employee. So that has to be, I think, first and foremost, that when you start to make this transition, not just to overseas people, but to remote in general, you have to start to change how your behavior is and your mindset and be comfortable growing to be a better manager and identify those things you got for free before, and you have to be intentional about them now. So that's point number one. Point number two is I think there is a big gap where people, and it's why we created Near, hirewithnear.com. Please go be our customer. We need the money. I recommend people go in with a partner. And when we first started Near, actually what we tried to do was do an American style job board that would enable small businesses to go hire offshore folks. And it didn't work. And as we went to go talk to customers, they were just like, look, we're so confused. Like, we don't even know if I hire a Mexican employee, like what taxes do I need to pay? Or like how do I do a background check on them? Like nobody has any clue about that stuff. So I think that's where I recommend people, if you have the opportunity, go to somebody like Near, and there's some competitors to Near, like hire a partner who can help you through that process. For example, in Argentina, this is one of the things that blew my mind. We do background checks here in the United States totally with private services. In Argentina, you go to there's a little government office and you go over there and they give you a piece of paper. Like the government does it. So you don't know that unless you have a partner. And that's why I really recommend having that approach, especially when you're starting out. Like go find somebody that's a vendor like us and let them shepherd you through the whole thing.
Whoa, hold on. Shepherd.
Yeah, they're great too. They're great too. Yeah, I mean, Nick is awesome and those guys are good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing about staffing and the thing about what's going on with offshoring, like there's a bazillion firms and ultimately it's a services model, and find somebody you can trust and you gel with their culture. And if it's Near or it's Shepherd or Oceans XYZ or whatever, like there's dozens of them out there. Shop around and see who you like. I think we're great, but that's just me. But yeah, Nick and those guys are great too.